right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. I just wanted to say thank you to the Plaza team for putting this together and making this opportunity to hang out with you possible. Once again, my name is Scott Stevenson. I'm a brand ambassador from Daniel Smith. I've been on board since 2016. I started off as actually as a sales rep and then have kind of morphed into this brand ambassador role. I get to have the pleasure of working with artists all over the country and being able to talk about Daniel Smith and all of the wonderful things about it. My art journey actually started in 1997 when my son was born. And he was a typical newborn who didn't sleep well at night. And in between my 3 jobs, I still had to figure out a way to get my wife some sleep at night. So my job would be to hang out with my son when he was young. And in between the time he was kind of doing his thing, doing things that babies do, I would have him in my left hand, and I would be having fun with art with my right hand. So anyway, that's kind of how I got started. And then I started off with watercolor with a $12.99 set of Prang watercolor. And one day I had a friend give me a tube of Daniel Smith Mayan Blue, and literally my world was rocked because no longer could I make the Prang watercolor do the things that Daniel Smith Mayan Blue could. So after that point, I became one of these guys who would lift up the couch and look under the washer and dryer, trying to find loose change so that he can save up for his next tube of Daniel Smith paint. In between that time, I also, for work, I also was a firefighter for the U.S. Forest Service in Southern California. And after a while, when my son was
Oh.
There we go.
Sorry
So
about that.
You got an itchy trigger finger over there.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so so I was a firefighter with the U.S. Forest Service, and then as my son got older, he would ask, hey, Dad, why don't we go camping? And I would have to say to him, well, son, typically my busy time of year is during the summer when all the fire's happening. And then he would say, hey, Dad, well, when are we supposed to go camping then? And then finally, it just kind of wore on me after so many years that I'd rather be the dad who took his son camping rather than the one who was chasing fire all over the country. So at that point, I started working for my mom, who started a manufacturer's rep agency where we would represent manufacturers like Daniel Smith to retailers like Plaza. So I got started doing that and became a sales rep. And then crazy enough, 15 years later, I'm working for Daniel Smith as a brand ambassador. So I'm very lucky to be able to do what I'm doing. I enjoy it. I'm passionate about Daniel Smith, and I'm passionate about watercolor. I enjoy working with artists. So anyways, that's a little bit about me. So a little bit about what we're going to do today. So today we're going to, is really all about you guys. I highly encourage you to, whatever questions you have, put them in the chat, and my good friend Tara will go ahead and read them out when she thinks when I get to a good spot. But really, the best thing that I could say is really that I want you to be able to ask the questions that are most intriguing to you. So this is a great opportunity for that. Feel free to go ahead and do it. I'm going to get into kind of the Daniel Smith history and how we make our paint. We'll talk about PrimaTek and some of the beautiful minerals that we have that go into our colors. We're also going to talk about things like granulation and quinacridone colors and light fastness. We're going to get into a bunch of buzzwords that that you commonly see associated with watercolor. And then we'll take a few minutes and look at the color chart and show you how to read our color chart so that you can get the most out of it in creating your palette. And then at the end, I'm going to go ahead and swatch out some of these beautiful colors so that you can see them yourself and see how well they'll actually fit into your palette. So with that, I am going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'm kind of gonna bounce around and be in and out of a presentation. I'm gonna go ahead and do this, and hopefully you all are seeing my cover page here. All right, so how did Daniel Smith happen? Well, it actually started in 1976 with this gentleman here, Mr. Daniel Smith. He is the founder of our company. He got his start in the art materials industry actually at the University of Washington in Seattle, where Dan worked as one of the people who worked at the printing press for the school newspaper. And one day they were all standing around the printing press lamenting how terrible the printmaking ink was that they were using for the newspaper, and how great it would be if somebody would actually create a better ink for them to use. Well, somebody started saying, well, how about you? Why don't you figure out a way to make a better ink? And, and inevitably it went through the entire room, and Dan was kind of the last one in the room that they looked at. And Dan said, sure, you know what do I have to lose? It sounds like kind of a fun project anyway. So Dan went ahead and did a lot of research, and he found the best black pigment he can find and found the best oil-based binder he could find. And he brought those ingredients back to his parents' basement in Bellevue, Washington, pulled the ingredients together and took it back to the school to give it a shot and to see what his coworkers would think. So they went ahead and gave it a shot, and it was much better than what they were using. So the newspaper started to kind of change over the ink to Dan's formula. And it didn't take long for the school's art department to hear about this wonderful black ink that the newspaper was using now, and they decided that they would like it for themselves. So they approached Dan, and Dan made them a batch, and the art department loved it. So much so that they came back to him and asked him to make it in about 5 or 6 other colors. So all of that was wonderful to Dan. Dan was having a good time making the ink, and now somebody was actually going to pay him to make 5 or 6 other colors. So he went ahead and did that and brought it back to the school, and everybody loved the printmaking ink, especially in the new colors. So eventually Dan just started getting tons and tons of orders from the school, and he was having a hard time how and who could be going through so much of this ink, because it seems like every day he was having to go and make ink during his time off from the printing press. And what he came to find out is that students were actually selling the ink on the side to other students. And the orders just kept on coming fast and furious, to the point to where Dan had to give up his job at the school printing press so that he can focus on manufacturing this really cool printmaking ink. So from that point forward, Dan became a manufacturer of color. So this is kind of an interesting picture. This is actually Dan sitting down at the mill, and these are his 2 early employees, 2 of his friends, making their first batches of printmaking ink. So fast forward to 1989, and Dan is itching to make a new product, and he goes ahead and he makes the Daniel Smith Original Oils. Daniel Smith Original Oils are still out in the market today, though they're not as popular as the watercolor. But 1989 rolls around, and Dan introduces Daniel Smith oils. It wasn't until 1993 that Dan decided that he wanted to make watercolor. But the problem is that he didn't know exactly how it should perform, how it should look, how it should feel, what colors he should have. He didn't have any of this information. So what he ended up doing is he ended up attending some of these festivals, watercolor festivals all over the world, most notably the one in Fabriano. where he would spend some time talking with various artists about what they would want. And he took all of that information back with him, back to Seattle, and created his initial batch of paint, and he brought it back out the following year so that the artists he talked to could try it. And the artists who contributed loved the product, and they started using it in in their work and in their classrooms and their workshops, and it really began to grow. So 1998 rolls around, and Dan decides to create really Daniel Smith Extra Fine Watercolor 2.0. And 2.0 meant that he was able to incorporate something that he really, really cared a lot about, and that was history. So, so Dan was really interested in a lot of the different ancient civilizations, like these down here you see on the bottom of page 2, where it says ancient peoples. These were the civilizations that Dan really was interested in, because what they had available to them were colors made from rocks and minerals that they were able to turn into paint. So civilizations like the Mayans and the Egyptians. The Egyptians, for example, they had lapis lazuli, and lapis lazuli is actually Latin for the blue stone. So lapis lazuli, originally from Afghanistan, was heavily imported into Egypt, and they would use this for not only for pigment, but they would also use it for paint, fabric dye, and of course jewelry. So lots of great examples of how some of these ancient civilizations would use minerals and rocks for pigment. Another great example of that is turquoise, where the Plains Indians would take turquoise and then blend it together with animal fat, and this would become their war paint. So lots of cool examples throughout history, and Dan wanted to figure out a way how to incorporate all of these beautiful colors that these civilizations used and make them available for artists of today to use. So initially he struggled with it, because the methods that these ancient civilizations used were frankly inadequate to be able to produce the amount of pigment needed to turn it into watercolor. So so he thought about it for quite a while and experimented with quite a few methods, and he finally found one that would work, and he called that process PrimaTek, which is short for primitive technology. So here's just kind of a flow chart and kind of how it works. We'll get into some more detail in the following pages here. But it all really starts with this gentleman here by the name of Bruce. And Bruce is our full-time mineralogist. He's been with us for over 30 years. And he actually has the job that I want when I'm really hoping that Bruce retires in the next 5 or 6 years, because I would love to be able to have his job. His job is to go all over the world and find all of these beautiful minerals. He gets to go pretty much to pretty much all 4 corners of the world and source all of our beautiful minerals for us. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you all a question here. So when Bruce goes ahead and sources minerals, we ask that he buy it in 15-year increments. So basically, he needs to buy enough pigment for 15 years. Why do you all think we do that? Why do we buy it in such large quantities? I'm going to go ahead and open up the chat here. I said that I wouldn't do that, Tara, but I'm going to do it anyway. Carmen, yes. Cindy, absolutely. Consistency is the #1 thing. When you're a paint manufacturer, that's the name of the game, what you want to be known for. So from batch to batch, we want to make sure that we can provide consistency in terms of color. So when you go ahead and you buy in that large amount, chances are when you're purchasing in such a large quantity that the color is going to be pretty much the same. because you're pretty much getting it from the ore, from a single piece of ore. So second thing is price and availability. Deborah, very good. When you think about it, and it's especially important to what's going on today. What's the thing that's happening today that's made everything go up? Inflation, right? So the nice part about buying in such large increments is it allows us to actually keep our costs relatively flat. So, and it also, just like Cindy, like you said, it also helps us to avoid supply chain issues. So at Daniel Smith, by the way, we consistently keep 15 years worth of pigment and mineral and gum arabic, even down to our tubes, we have a 15-year supply of. So that when we have these supply chain issues, that we're in a very good spot. And through the pandemic, we've been very, very fortunate to be able to be very, very good about being in stock and not having feasts and famines, per se, with our supplies. The other thing that's really important about keeping that sort of supply is that when we do that, it allows us to really kind of focus in and market the product well. Imagine what would happen if we had a beautiful color that we put out, but it disappeared after 2 years. I don't think you all would be very happy about that. So so by doing that, it just makes sure that you as our artists can count on that color being in our line year after year. Okay, so
Scott,
go ahead.
All right, I do have a couple of questions run by you.
Okay.
So let's see. Scrolling back up. Okay. Okay. Cindy asked if there was a set of all of the granulating. I apologize. Apparently there's some construction going on next. It's weird. If there was a set of all of the granulating colors.
We do not have a set of the granulating colors. We do have our PrimaTek collection, which does include quite a few colors that do granulate. Maybe Terry might, I'm pretty sure you guys stock that set.
We do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a link in the chat to all of the Daniel Smith sets so that people can scroll through and see.
Excellent.
See all of those. Thank you, Cindy. That was a really good question. And I think that Scott should pass that along to product development.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
But we have a lot of colors that granulate. It might end up being a 60 color set.
I know, right? But people are really interested in that. So
absolutely.
Okay. All right. And then Donna asked if she could share the handouts with friends and family. And I am responding.
Of course.
Absolutely. What I'm going to put in the chat is that our stores, should have the color charts on hand in most locations, I believe. If not, Scott will send them out there. So if you need a color chart, pick one up there. But Scott's booklet here, which is specific to this event. You don't host this anywhere online, do you, Scott?
Do I host
the document? Like if somebody wanted to get another copy of.
Of course, no. All of our literature, everything that you have in your kit,
okay.
I'm able to order more of and get and supply anytime you need it.
Okay, great. So we should definitely send, both out to the stores so that they've got some for our lovely attendees and customers. Thank you. That would be great. All right. And then I apologize. I am scrolling through some direct messages. So I just want to make sure I don't miss anything. All right. Debbie asks if each mineral must come from the same location each time.
Generally speaking, yes. Each region has kind of what they're known for. Let me get out of this and I'll show you what I mean. So we have Sleeping Beauty turquoise, which is in Arizona, and then 350 miles away is Kingman Green turquoise, but they're 500 miles apart, but yet they have two very different colors. So location is very important. So each location typically will bring something unique and different depending upon the locale.
Very cool. And then Sasa asks, do you overlap batches? If so, at what point? So the 15 years runs out, right?
Mm-hmm. Generally speaking, you know, it's constantly a thing where we don't wait 15 years to reorder. It's kind of a constant thing, so that 15 years is constantly maintained. So when we reach kind of a threshold where it's an ordering point, generally we almost always order from the same mine owner, because number one, we can verify the color to make sure it's consistent, and two, we like to do it that way because we like to make sure that our minerals are ethically attained. We definitely don't do business with people who engage in things like child labor and things like that. So we're very particular about the mine owners that we work with.
Very cool. All right. So next one is, is there a list of the granulating colors? You know, you can answer this, but
I believe Claudia, who was paying attention to the chat, she answered it perfectly. When our color chart denotes which colors granulate and which ones don't. So once again, we'll go through the color chart and you'll be able to see exactly which colors granulate and which ones don't.
Yeah, it's an indication under each color in the color chart. So Scott will talk about that.
Yeah, we'll hit that in a bit.
Right. Okay. Let's see what else we got. Do you still make printing inks?
No, unfortunately, but I get so many different requests for us to do that. There's definitely a fan base out there that would love to see us remake it. And as recently as last month, I asked again, and the answer is there's no plans in the future to bring it back, unfortunately.
So the line is just oils and watercolors, correct?
Oils and watercolors, correct.
Okay. All right, and last one for now. Can you discuss the difference between the non-metal containing versions? Wait. Can you discuss the differences between the non-metal containing versions of metal containing colors? Audra, do you want to unmute and clarify a little bit? Oh, the watercolors that now don't have metals. Oh, so are you talking about cadmiums and things like that? Yes, exactly. Okay.
Okay, so we're talking about cadmiums. So we made the decision about 6 years ago to eliminate cadmiums from our line and use pigments that are kind of synthesized to replicate what cadmiums can do, because we recognized then that cadmiums were going to become an issue in the future, especially for health and safety, and not just for our artists who use them, but also for the people who have to actually make the paint. The particles in cadmium are so small that there's not a filtration system that we have that can eliminate all of the cadmium particles out of the air. So we've gone ahead and removed cadmiums from our line and have replaced them with what we call hues, which means essentially that we're blending different pigments together in order to synthesize what cadmiums look like. Cobalts, we still do have cobalts in our line, and I think that's something in the future that that may end up going away. But as of right now, the governing testing body, which is called ACMI, which basically helps create an agency which sets guidelines and standards so that we can be in compliance with what our industry requires. But as of right now, cobalt, because of how well, especially in this application of watercolor and in the dilution that happens with water, we're still pretty confident and okay with having cobalts in our line.
Okay, so I'm gonna wait because I think you're gonna address some of these other questions.
Okay.
And if not, I will bring them up.
All right, so let's jump back in here. Okay, so what ends up happening, Bruce also ends up handling the transportation from whatever country it is to Seattle, Washington, which is still where we make our paint. Everything that we do still happens there in Seattle. And when we're ready to make a batch of paint, what we'll do is that we'll break off a piece of the mineral. And sometimes I should also mention that when we buy mineral, we're buying really in large chunks. I mean, I'm talking about, some of them are about the size of small cars, very big. So Bruce arranges the transportation and it ends up in the Port of Seattle, which where we'll send a truck to pick it up and we'll take it to our factory. And when we go ahead and decide to make a batch of paint, what we'll do is we'll break off a piece of mineral about the size of a watermelon, and we'll take it to our first mill, which is what we call a jaw mill. So that's the picture that you see here at the bottom of the page. So it's down there on the bottom. It says jaw mill picture number 1. So what ends up happening is that we put that big watermelon piece size of mineral in that jaw mill, and it applies gentle pressure to the mineral, causing it to break along what we call cleave lines. So basically, if you think about a crystal, and when a crystal breaks, it has these different lines, and we call them cleave lines. So basically, when we put our watermelon-sized piece of mineral in that jaw mill, puts pressure on the mineral, and then it'll break it into pieces that are this size. So basically, this is the size of a softball, so about the size of your fist. And we'll probably get about 10 to 12 pieces of this out of that watermelon-sized piece of mineral. Okay. So now that we've got it this size, we'll go ahead and bring it to the next mill, which is what we call our hammer mill. And what it does is that it has a spinning blade, and that blade churns at a really high rate of speed, and the mineral is put into a clamp. And what we're able to do is remove all of the parts of the mineral that we don't like. So let me show you a picture of this. This is a raw piece of lapis. So you see all of the gray here? This is all product that we can't use. So we have to figure out a way to remove that gently without destroying the rest of the mineral. So what that hammer mill does is that it spins at a really high rate of speed, and we have the mineral in a clamp, and that blade will eat into the mineral and remove all of the product that we don't want, and hopefully leave enough product that we can use. So after that happens, after we go through that hammer mill, most of the time we're getting pieces now that are this size. So we're getting probably six pieces this size out of that softball size. So there's a lot of refinement. And because we have this process, this PrimaTek process, it allows us to use minerals that don't have to be perfect. Like they don't have to be jewelry grade. So that's the other thing too that I probably should mention is when we source our minerals, we are generally taking the things that other industries don't want. So that's kind of something important to ask, that all of the minerals that we use are typically things that other industries have discarded. So we're very lucky to have a process that allows us to be able to use imperfect things and then turn them into things that produce beautiful color. Okay, so let me head on back here. All right, now that we have the paint or the mineral in this size, we take it to where to the next mill, which is really where I think kind of the miracle happens with all of this. So what you see down there in the bottom is our ball mill, and the ball mill is a spinning cylinder. It's just imagine like a clothes dryer, if you will, and it tumbles like that. And you load the little pieces of mineral on the side, and then it tumbles on the inside of the ball mill against, basically there's about 500 silica ball bearings that are very, 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 very hard. So the mineral bounces against all of those ball bearings and causes the mineral to break in very, very, very small pieces. Basically, it breaks it into what we call 40 microns. So to kind of put that in perspective, go ahead and feel the thickness of your handout, okay? That's 100 microns. Your hair, by the way, is 70 microns. So basically what this ball mill is doing is that it's breaking it down into something so small that these particles are literally, they're hardly able to even be picked up by the human eye. So, and what's really cool about that is even though we make it so small, we don't lose what's interesting and valuable about the mineral. So that could be the beautiful granulation that you see here from the color sodalite. Or it could be the beautiful shimmer that you see from burnt bronzite. So even though we make it really, really small, we don't lose what's interesting and valuable about the mineral. So to me, that's really kind of the crazy cool thing, is that we're able to take something that is so large and yet make it small enough, but not lose what's interesting and valuable about the mineral. All right, any questions? Any questions about that part of the process? All right, we'll keep going.
Sorry, I was muted, but every time I go to this construction isn't happening constantly. It's just every time, like, you know, of course.
I get you. No
all right, well, really quick while they're quiet. What is granulating color?
We will talk about that in a little bit. Okay. There's a very specific reason why granulation happens. So, but we'll get into it in just a bit, I promise.
Okay, and then the other question was, does Daniel Smith make a granulating medium, and do you even think granulating mediums work well with non-granulating colors?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah. First of all, we do not use any granulating medium in our products whatsoever. Everything that happens is the result of the natural attribute of the mineral and the way that we process it. I'm kind of a purist when it comes to paint. I don't like adding anything more than I need to, and I'm kind of always more attracted to the natural beauty of the color without adding something to it. Just my opinion. And I haven't had enough experience with our competitors' granulating medium to be able to tell you one way or the other and be educated about it. But my thinking is, why not use a color that already has that attribute built in and doesn't require anything synthetic to make it do so? Good question.
Yeah. Okay. Will you be talking about water and what chemicals in water are least ideal for use with watercolors, i.e. iron, salts used in water softeners, etc.?
Absolutely. We'll be talking about that in just a minute.
Scott covers like everything. He's a watercolor encyclopedia. So we're all walking. I learn something new every time that I moderate one of these events and attend. So
all right,
great.
So you all were stealing my thunder. So that brings us kind of to the next piece here, is what happens next. So now that we have the mineral to the size that we want it, we bring it to where we bring all of our products, or really all of our ingredients together. So we only have the pigment or mineral, our gum arabic, which is our binder, and we use distilled water. So here we go. Here's that conversation about water and what's ideal. So let's talk about the things that we know are in tap water. So go ahead and hit me with a few of them. I can tell you that I used to live in a part of California where I lived in farm country pretty much, and everything that we had, all the water that we had was all well water. And man, I had a really interesting experience when I took a glass of tap water and I put it to the light, and I was amazed about what I saw floating around in my water, to that point where I was cured forever and decided that bottled water was probably in the best interest of my health. So let's talk about what's kind of in the water. So we're talking about fluoride and iron. Iron could be from pipes, especially older ones. Chlorine, depending upon what part of the country, some folks still put chlorine in their water. I see sulfur. Sulfur is one that I guess could be there, but there's really one common one that I think a lot of the country deals with. And what is that white stuff on your shower doors if you don't have a water softener? When you take a shower, you see like a white film and it ends up on your shower doors. What is that?
It's a calcium kind of.
You got it. Yes, calcium. Calcium's another mineral, right? So here's what happens. So when you have a solution of water, and I think the diagram where it says distilled water versus tap water is a good one. Okay, so when you compare the two side by side, the blue represents the water molecules, and you look to the left in the tap water, and you see all sorts of different things there, right? And those blue dots are spaced further and further apart. Well, that's what happens, right? So when we use tap water to paint with, it's actually pushing those paint particles further apart. And what ends up happening is our paint can look slightly less vibrant because those paint particles are further apart. But when we use distilled water, since there is no other particles besides just pure H2O, those paint particles are closer together and it makes your paint look more concentrated. So here's the big question though, does all of those things that are in our water affect the light fastness of the color? And as of pretty recently, based upon our chemists doing light fastness breakdowns and all sorts of things, as much as we think that it should diminish the quality of paint, we haven't found that to be true yet. So and who knows, it might take 500 years to find out, you know, what it is exactly that that could change the light fastness of the color. But it is not, so far yet, we have not yet been able to create a direct line between tap water and distilled water make any difference in terms of light fastness. So the big question is then, well, why does Daniel Smith use distilled water at all? Why don't they just use tap water? Because tap water certainly is a lot less expensive. And what it comes down to is consistency. So when you have all of those other particles in the water, right, it creates what we call a variable in our paint making process. And that's something that we try very hard to stay away from, because we want to be able to produce a consistent result every single time. Now, if we use distilled water, that takes the variable out of the paint making process, and therefore we end up with a solution that allows us to basically arrive at the same place batch after batch after batch. Great question. Okay, so you see those vessels there, which are really just kind of big pots. So the smallest one you see there is 5 gallons. And then the one in the way in the back is something that we have to kind of shrink down for the picture, but that's actually 500 gallons. So big range, and depending upon which color we're doing a production run with, we choose the appropriate vessel or the pot to basically blend the paint in. So so after we bring all of our ingredients together, we take it down to our mixing station. So that mixer right there is actually, it's kind of a deceptive picture, because when we use it, we actually raise that up 16 feet tall. So we raise that up 16 feet. And what it does is on the end of that shaft there is a blade, and that blade churns the paint at a really high rate of speed. So basically, when we have that thing going, it's churning so fast that it creates what we call the Venturi Effect. So the Venturi Effect is that when you start a liquid moving in at a high rate of speed, it wants to draw air down into the mixture of the paint. So the good news is it does a great job of mixing the paint together, but there's 2 things that happen that we really don't like. Number one, when you're churning this, when you're churning that fast, and bringing all that air in, it changes the consistency of the paint. And when we're done churning the paint, it's actually more of like a heavy whipped cream type of consistency. And then also because when you introduce air into the mixture of the paint, it creates static electricity, which what ends up happening is that it creates almost like a vacuum where it wants to bring together the paint particles and cause them to tangle. So think about a clothes dryer for a moment. If you don't put one of those static sheets in the dryer, it causes all that static electricity to develop, and makes your clothes stick together. So same thing happens here, and it creates what we call agglomerates, and those agglomerates cause the paint particles to clump. So when we look down at the bottom here, I'll show you what that kind of looks like. So you see that here, where you see these tangles, where you see all those paint particles are tangled. What we want them to look like is what you see down here on the bottom when all of the particles are laid out in a more linear fashion. So that's the way we want them to look. So we have a process to make that happen, and it's what we call a dispersion mill, or a 3-roll mill, I think probably is the more common name. Here's kind of when we go to mix, we have to pre-mix our pigment together before we kind of put it in that mixer. But here's what a 3-roll mill looks like. So this mill is really common among pretty much all paints, whether it be oil, acrylic, watercolor, pretty much everything, gouache, you name it. So this 3-roll mill is really important to the process. And the way that it works is that you have these 3 cylinders, and the cylinders are spinning in opposite directions of each other. So you have cylinder 1, which is spinning clockwise, and then you have cylinder 2, which I'm doing this in reverse, which is kind of funny seeing myself do this. And then the third one is spinning again clockwise. So when the paint comes up over the top of the first cylinder and hits that second cylinder, it's like a train wreck happens. It's literally it's like a head-on car crash. So you have the cylinders are spinning and going 60 miles an hour, and then when they collide, it creates this tearing effect, so that the paint, so that the gum arabic can get in between each of those paint particles. So, and as it comes over the second one and hits the third, that train wreck happens all over again and rips them apart and keeps and also helps to keep it so that the gum arabic is between each of those paint particles. So, and depending upon the color and the specific attributes of the color, we may have to run that through that process probably 5 or 6 times. So here's a little better look at it, and we show you from different views. So when you look here at the top, Dispersion Mill picture 2, what you're seeing is really the end of the machine, and that triangular little area is what we call the apron, and that's where the paint exits the mill. So the paint is actually loaded on the other side. So here's another look at it here. So here's the apron, and you can kind of see that the paint is actually starts on the back end and then flows to the front. And then here's a gentleman here who's actually loading the paint onto the mill, and the gentleman on the other end, his job is to go ahead with the squeegee and squeegee all the paint into a bucket like the one that you see there. So that leads us to really the only part of automation that we have in our entire factory. This, our tube filling station, is important for several reasons, but it's also the only thing that's kind of almost automated. So what ends up happening is that that tube filling station, there's a carousel in front of it, and it's loaded with the tubes upside down like this. So the crimp is open here, and then there's a little applicator that'll go into the tube and inject the right amount of paint. So in this case, it'll inject 15 mil worth of paint into this tube, and then once it does that, it creates a crimp, and then it also stamps a batch number on the end of the tube. So that batch number is like a control number, and we actually do a couple things. So that batch number will coincide with one of these, which is what we call a paint out. And these paint outs are kind of like recipe cards, and they're numbered, and the number that's on the tube will be on the back of the paint out as reference. And on this, we'll list out everything that went into making this into this batch paint. So things like the date and time and temperature, and the chemist and the machine workers, anything and everything that they could think of that would help them solve a problem if there was ever an issue with the paint. So why do we put it on the tubes themselves? Say what would happen if we had a tube of Sedona here, Sedona Genuine, and you bought it, you loved it, you used it, and you went through it, and then you went to buy another tube, and you started using it. You're like, wait a minute, this doesn't look like the same color. Well, you could take those batch numbers on the crimp of the tube and call Daniel Smith customer service. They'll pull these paint outs out and put them side by side, and they'll probably give you one of 2 responses. So the first one could be, hey, thank you for bringing that to our attention. We want to look into that, and we'll let you know what we find. But the second one is probably the most common one, and it kind of goes like this. Hey, Scott, was your water clean when you were using this? Or was there anything else in your brush? So we're sticklers for making sure that we're consistent from batch to batch, and we actually have these logged going back 35 years now. So this is our mode. This is the way that we're able to interface with you and help you and help you deal with problems that you might be seeing from home. All right, this is a good spot for questions. What do we got?
All right, so there's a discussion happening in the chat about the difference between, or what, sorry, why, all right, let me go back up to Susie's original comment because people have been chiming in. So Susie says, sorry to ask about money, but as a college educator teaching watercolor and water media, I get asked a lot why Daniel Smith is so much more expensive than competitors. Is the short answer to this the pigments and how they are prepared? Is it that you are a smaller batch in comparison to, say, Winsor Newton? What do you recommend to students that are on a very limited budget but want to buy your products?
Good question. So I think about how I was in the beginning when I first started with watercolor, and I think the biggest thing that I noticed was, and I think it's especially important for folks who are beginners, is that there is a direct line between having something that works versus something that you don't. So lower quality paints, like you alluded to, they use fillers in the paint, and the problem when you have a lot of filler in the paint is that it doesn't allow you to get clean blends or clean mixes. So using a better quality product, even though it might be a little bit more expensive, you'll get better results. And it also helps your confidence too. When you use an inferior product and you're disappointed with your results, it could be catastrophic. It could be the reason why somebody doesn't paint again. So, but using quality products from the beginning is also a confidence builder, because it makes sure that you're going to be able to create clean mixes and also have and create and really kind of create a better standard going forward. So it all comes down to the pigment and what's added to it. But most of the time, I think it's about the result. It's tough to get a great result from paint that doesn't perform well. So, and I think that's probably one of the tougher things, for people who are getting into watercolor to kind of wrap their head around, that they undersell the importance of using a good quality paint.
Yeah, and thank you, Scott, and that's true. It was just, I just want to elaborate on that a little bit. So I looked up the pricing, and if you're talking about Winsor Newton professional watercolor, I looked at burnt sienna. So the retail for Winsor Newton version is $20.79, whereas Daniel Smith is $17.75. And Daniel Smith has what's called minimum advertised pricing, which means that you have to, as a retailer like us, you have to adhere. You cannot sell it for a lower than a certain amount. And that amount is 40% off. And so Plaza has Daniel Smith at 40% off every single day. There is a lower quality, and I'm only mentioning Winsor Newton because you did, called Cotman. And that is a $5 tube. But like Scott said, you're getting much less pigment, more fillers. And if you are teaching a class and mixing, you're not going to get that, those color combinations. One thing that could be recommended, watercolor goes a long way. Scott's not going to love this, but as a Daniel Smith rep, watercolor goes a really long way. If you have, I mean, I would, the best thing would use the best, my recommendation would be to use the best quality paint, use Daniel Smith, but have students go in on it, on a list of colors and share them.
That's a great idea. That was just something that crossed my mind, is if our paint is so concentrated, a little bit goes a long way. So if there are students who wanted to split the cost, say even a third, split the cost into thirds, that's another way to bring the cost down some. And that's a great idea. I mean, the great thing about doing that, even if the paint dries out, the paint's not lost. It just needs to be rehydrated.
Yeah, they could literally squeeze it out into an empty pan, and or palette that has the wells in it.
Mm-hmm.
And it dries, and then you treat it like a pan instead of a wet tube watercolor. Mm-hmm. There are options. It's as an instructor, and you always want your students to have the best product, but if you're teaching color mixing, especially, you're just not going to get the results with a lower quality student grade paint. So thank you, Scott, for letting me, I'm in on that. Yeah.
No problem. All right. Let's get going. Okay. Now we're going to jump into a few things here. So let's talk about light fastness, for example. What is the definition of light fastness? And why is that? And let me ask you all this. Why is using a light fast product important? You guys didn't think I would ask questions of you, did I? So color doesn't fade in sunlight. Yes. So the way that we define light fastness is a particular pigment's ability to resist ultraviolet light. So we actually have a machine, which I'm showing you here. It's called a Xenon Phanometer, and that machine will actually tell us what the light fastness is for a particular color. So I'm going to go ahead and flash over here so that you all can see what it looks like on the inside. So this machine is about the size of your refrigerator, and on the inside it has a carousel, and that carousel we put our paint outs in. And in the middle of that, a shaft comes down, and in the middle of that shaft is actually a light bulb, and that light bulb produces a very, very bright amount of light. Basically, it can replicate over 120 years worth of ultraviolet light exposure in 4 days. So think about that for a moment. So that's 120 times 365, and it's accomplished in 4 days. It's pretty crazy, right? So, and the light that it produces is the same light that you would see in June at noon, and it replicates that for 120 years, but does it in 4 days. So that's pretty amazing. Matter of fact, that machine gets so hot that if we didn't put distilled water in the middle of that bulb, or around the bulb there, the whole machine would actually melt. It gets that hot, and it produces light that bright. So after the 4 days, we go ahead and take those paint outs out and put them next to a template. And based upon the amount of fade, helps us to determine what the light fastness is of each of our colors. And that is done batch after batch after batch. Each batch goes through this process to make sure that that we're consistent with our light fastness, so that we can accurately tell you which colors will last for so many years. So the other machine that we see there is our photo spectrometer. So that machine is designed to produce a value to give us an idea of how close a match our colors are. So the way that it works is that that black handle looking thing, you pull that down, and then you take a little chunk of the paint out and you put it in that window, and you close the handle and you turn the machine on, and the machine will send light into the pigment molecule, and it'll measure the angle from which the light goes into the particle and to the angle in which it bounces it away. And when it does that, it sends a value to a computer where the computer assigns a number. So some of you might have heard what's called C lab, C as in Charles, E as in Edward, lab. What it does is that produces a number. And then when we do subsequent tests from batch to batch to batch, we're trying to hit that number that that machine produces every time. So based upon that, that allows us to help us quickly determine that we have color matches from batch to batch. So let's talk about some popular buzzwords here. Go ahead.
Second too late there. Okay, is the grading after the Fedometer done by humans or automated?
It is done by humans.
Very cool. Right.
All right. Granulation. So we started talking about this earlier. And let's kind of break it down as to why it happens. What causes granulation to happen? Basically, what happens is that when you go ahead and mill these pigments, you have some ability to determine whether a color will granulate or not, simply just by manipulating the particle size. So with granulation, what you're seeing is, and we're talking about whether it be a synthetic pigment or a mineral. Generally speaking, when those are being produced, those particles are all different. Even though they're 40 microns, they're different shapes and different sizes, and some of them even have different weights. Okay. So when that happens, the chunkier the pigment or the mineral, it wants to seep into the nooks and crannies or the tooth of the paper. Okay, and then the gum arabic and the distilled water wants to float to the top. So so I'm going to go ahead and show you one of my favorite green colors here. This is green apatite. And so all of that granulation that you see there is the result of just the particle size on the mineral. So we don't add anything to it. We don't add a granulating medium for our colors to do this. This just happens to happen naturally because of the different sizes of the particles. So let me ask you all this. Why do you think, or give me some specific instances where you could use a color that granulates? Foliage, yeah, very good. Painting pavement, yeah, especially for say a color like hematite. Hematite, for example, is a beautiful color that you could use for that, for like buildings and things like that. Anywhere you want texture, that's absolutely true. So the reason why I really started like using texture or using granulation is because I hated doing detail work. Like the whole idea of trying to say, like if I was doing a tree, to try and get the branches right and things like that was something that I really, really struggled with. And when somebody showed me a color that granulates, I immediately loved it because it did a much better job of articulating what nature can do than I can with my brush or my pen. So it kind of changed my perspective and how I painted. So I learned how to paint from a distance. And when I did that, I didn't have to worry about the detail so much because the granulation of the colors took care of a lot of the detail work for me, which kind of freed me to think, to be able to think differently about how I painted. So I love that granulation gives us texture options. I love that it adds depth and dimension. And it's a great pair where you're trying to articulate something that you want your viewer to see. Is there any more questions about granulation?
Yes. Good one. Is granulation something that my fingers can actually touch?
Yes, I think you can feel it a little bit differently than a color that doesn't. Typically speaking, when we're talking about synthetic pigments, those can vary in size, and some of the ones that are more finer that don't seem to have granulation associated with it, I think you can notice a difference. But I think the bigger thing here too is talking about paper and how paper can kind of influence feel and granulation. So let me ask you all this. Do you think you're going to see more granulation or less granulation out of if you were to use hot press?
Less.
Less, right? Because there is not as much nooks and crannies in hot press. Matter of fact, it's a very smooth paper. So why don't we go to the opposite end of the spectrum and talk about rough paper? Do you think you're going to see more or less granulation with rough? More, right? Because there's those nooks and crannies are further apart, and that provides more area for the granulating paint particles to kind of populate in. So when you use a rough paper, it really highlights what granulating colors can do. And paper definitely changes the feel, right? Because the more texture the paper is, the more feedback you get back through the brush. Kind of like driving a car on different surfaces on the road, where you can feel the the vibration on a rough road, but on a new road, it feels very smooth. So it's the same thing with paper. But I think the thing to think about too, just talking about paper for a moment, is that paper is a tool, just like using a brush is a tool, or using colors that granulate is a tool. Paper can be the same way. So I really encourage everyone to not be locked in on one certain type of surface of paper. Try different ones to see what different results you can get. All right, let's jump in.
Does that,
here.
Scott, does that go for cellulose paper as well as 100% cotton, or do you feel very strongly about one or the other?
Well, I think when you're talking about cellulose paper, the number one concern that a lot of people have is whether the paper is acid free or not, or whether it'll yellow. I think that's one of the bigger concerns about cellulose paper. And it's probably why the majority of the papers that we deem as professional grade are all 100% cotton ones. So, but choosing papers that have different sizing. Sizing is the product that is injected in the paper to make it so that it's less absorbent. So I think everybody has kind of has their own standard in which they measure how absorbent certain watercolor papers are, and depending upon how absorbent they are, also has a lot to do with how well we can lift color off paper. So paper is a huge deal, and it's a tool. I see Claudette's question here. Does sizing come from animals, or is it synthetic? It depends on the manufacturer. I know of one where they actually use, I hate to say it, it's definitely not vegan. It's made from rabbit, not exactly which parts, but I know it's made from rabbits. But then there are others out there that are made from vegetable, more or less a plant-based product. And there are definitely a few of those out there. So it's definitely, I mean, we definitely have a lot of great choices for paper out there. You know, I think probably my favorite is probably the Fabriano Artistico, which I believe everybody got a sample of, if you're wondering what that paper is. But I like it because it's consistent. The sizing is applied consistently. I don't see any issues with it. All right, we got to hit the road. We got to get going. Okay, jumping in back here. Let's talk about quinacridone for a moment. So what does quinacridone mean? What does that word mean? So basically it means 5 rings. So basically you think about quin, right? Quin means 5, and cridone means rings in Latin. So that's where that word comes from. We actually break down exactly what the chemical formula is for quinacridone. So if you see here on the top of page 11 and you come down to where it says properties and chemical formula, that is the chemical formula for quinacridone. So quinacridone was actually discovered in the 1890s by a German chemist, but it wasn't mass produced until 1958 by a famous paint company out of Canada called DuPont. And they were the first manufacturer to make paint from quinacridone for the automotive industry. So the first car maker to use quinacridone was actually Toyota. Toyota was the first auto manufacturer to use quinacridone colors in their paint. So so in case you all didn't know, the paint industry or the car industry pretty much dictates every single color that you and I have to work with. Basically, there's a really big disparity between what we use in art versus what the other industries use. So the pigment manufacturers pay attention first to the automotive industry and respond to what their needs are. And generally speaking, we get what the automotive industry tends to buy in bulk. So let me ask you all this. What do you think are the top 3 users or top 3 industries that use pigment? What's number 1? Nope, not fashion. Nope, not cement. Auto, yeah, Carmen, you got it, number 1. What's number 2? How about house paint? Number 3 will be kind of a shock. I think will be a shock to people. Anybody want to guess? How about plastics? Plastics are number 3. So if you think for a moment, you know how they used to show in the old days that every 3 days there's enough water bottles discarded in our landfills to fill the Rose Bowl. So plastics are that's huge. They're huge users of pigment. So basically, for us, for our uses, we only account for 0.1% of the overall pigment that's produced in the world today. And truthfully, there's only about 5 producers of pigment in the entire world. So we're a very, very small player in that overall scenario. So anyway, so quinacridone. So what do we like about quinacridone? Tell me some things that you all like about it. Vibrant, yep. They are definitely vibrant. I'm going to go ahead and get out of this. I'll show you some examples of our quinacridones. What I really love about our quinacridones is just how bright and vibrant and just the span of color that we actually get out of these. We have a really big range of them. We have 14 total quinacridones in our selection of color. We have more than anybody else actually among our competitors. We have a lot more. And there are some really interesting things about quinacridones that are kind of fun to talk about. Let me show you this. Do you see any sort of granulation here? No, right? There's not a lot. What you do see is actually because of the paper. So, and there's a reason for that. So if you look at that, if we go back and look at that diagram, all of those 5 molecules, they're all the same shape, the same size, and the same weight. So they're all exactly the same. So imagine what would happen when you have a bunch of those together, and they would come together kind of like a jigsaw puzzle where all of the pieces are exactly the same. So basically they come together very seamlessly. And because they are all exactly the same, there's no granulation. So very, very cool. Other thing that's really, I really like about our quinacridones is really just the transparency of them and all the fun color blending, color blending opportunities that you have with them. So a lot of good stuff. All right. Tara, is there any questions about quinacridone in there?
Well, yeah, when it says burnt, and this is a great question. It says burnt and the hue name is fire actually somehow.
Yes, it actually does. I'll give you an example here. So here is tiger's eye, and we get tiger's eye from South Africa, and it produces this color here. So what we do is when we have a color that we think we want to create a variant of, we can take either a mineral. Well, we would take a mineral and we would put it in a kiln for about 8 hours. And then after 8 hours, the mineral comes out looking like this. And when you put things under heat for an extended period of time, the heat changes even the internal color of the mineral. So the same thing happens like when we're talking about burnt sienna, burnt umber. Those things are actually happening. We actually put those under fire, and when that happens, it changes the color.
All right, so why no blue quins?
Why no blue quins? Specifically, it's because the automotive industry hasn't requested one. Is it possible? Absolutely. So let me show you how that could happen. So when we're looking at our diagram here, you see that on the diagram of the quinacridone pigment, you see these lines that are all there. Chemists can actually move where those markers are, and when they do that, it changes the way that light refracts through the molecule. So depending upon where those are, light is bent, and when light is bent, it changes the way that our eye interprets the color. So anything's possible. They could make any sort of color they want out of this, but the baseline color for quinacridone is actually a red. Very interesting. All right. Okay, so let's talk about particle size for a moment. I'm going to show you 2 colors. Grab these over here. Get out of here. Oops. I'm going to show you 2 colors. So here we have French ultramarine, and here we have ultramarine. Now, when you look at our color chart, they're exactly the same, with one. I think there's just one minor difference. So, but when you look at the French, it looks a little bit different. It has a little bit more granulation. And it also seems to be a bit warmer than the ultramarine, which these two colors come from the same pigment. So what's the deal here? Well, it is in fact the same pigment, but the difference is the particle size. Yep. So the French has a larger particle size, and when you have a larger particle size, you get more interaction with the light, which makes the color look warmer. Okay. And because those particles are bigger, that's why we see more granulation. Now, with the ultra smaller particle size, it's 6 microns. Those particles are closer together, and when that happens, you see less granulation. And because those particles are smaller, there's less interaction with the light, and it actually makes it look cooler. So that's so even though these come from the same pigments, different particle size actually can change the attributes of the color. Very cool. All right. Let's head on back. Okay, so here's our whole range of quinacridone colors in case you're all are interested. It's a pretty complete line. I would love to see more quinacridone colors, to be honest. All right, let's chat about some of our minerals. And I'll show you kind of where some of them come from. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get out. That'll probably just be quicker. All right, I showed you this color, or I showed you the mineral, but you didn't exactly get to see the color. So this color is called Kyanite, and Kyanite we get from South America, and it's a beautiful color. It's a little hard to tell from the camera, but there's actually quite a bit of shimmer associated with Kyanite, and you can really see it because there's tons of mica in the mineral. That's Kyanite. This is one of the more beautiful greens that I think we have. This is called Serpentine, and Serpentine we get from Tasmania, the island off of Australia. And what's really cool is that you have all of these different bands of green and then mixed in with some brown. This is a color that's really awesome to make with, for fall foliage and colors like that. It really provides a lot of dimension and uniqueness. And it's also very, very congenial with other colors in terms of doing blending and things like that. Okay. Let's talk about lapis and get into a little bit more about that. So this is Lapis Lazim. Here's the color that it makes. But we actually get the mineral from 2 different parts of the world. So this piece here we get from Afghanistan, which is kind of a tough place in the world to get product from right now. But most of the lapis that we get is actually from Chile, and Chile is definitely a more easier place to do business. But as you can see here, there's big differences in the color purity. We get more purity from the product that we get from Afghanistan, but it's way hard to try and get this consistently. Just because of geopolitical events and things like that. So vast majority of the lapis we get is from Chile. All right, next one is called Amazonite. And Amazonite is a beautiful turquoise color that we get once again from South America. Here's what the mineral looks like. And what's really kind of cool about Amazonite is that the ancient civilizations there believed that Amazonite had healing powers. So basically what they would do is they would take the Amazonite and then rest it on the chest and the forehead of the people that were sick, and they believed that it would heal them. And I totally get why, because when you pick up this mineral, it has this really interesting coolness associated with it. I could put this on the hood of my car in August and pick it up, and it still has this very eerie coolness associated with it. So I could totally understand why the ancient civilizations thought it had healing powers. But it's a beautiful color, and it also produces some interesting results, and it has a great kind of a fun history associated with it. Okay. This is Minnesota Pipestone. We actually get Minnesota Pipestone from Nebraska. What's really interesting about Minnesota Pipestone is that the reason why it gets its name is that the Plains Indians would take this mineral and actually carve it into their peace pipes. So that's where that name comes from. So it's a really neat color that's great for skin tones and things like that. And it has kind of a very, very light granulation associated with it. And it has actually a great range of values depending upon how much water you get with it. Okay. This is bloodstone. Bloodstone we actually are able to get from different parts of the world. Bloodstone gets its name, very interestingly, from the Middle East, and it's rumored to be that this mineral was present on the hill where Jesus Christ was crucified. So this mineral was found in that area, and because of that, they called it bloodstone. So, but it's a beautiful, heavy granulating color. Tons of texture going on there, and a kind of a more of a maroonish color. Hey, Tara, you can jump in with questions anytime you want.
The only one I have is any pigment made from granite?
Granite, not yet. And I think the biggest problem with granite is the fact that it's very, very hard. So, we just haven't seen a different variety of granite yet. Okay.
All right, I sent you a DM, Scott, real quick. I will be right back.
Okay. All right. So I'll pick it up here. All right. Let's look at one more color, and then we'll get moving and move on. I'm going to show you amethyst. So we use actually real amethyst in our amethyst paint. So really kind of cool. It granulates, which creates this beautiful color, and it also shimmers when it's done setting up. That's that. Donna has a question. So she's asking, why do some paint names include the word genuine? Well, genuine is your clue that color derives from a mineral. So, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into the color chart. But anytime that word genuine, it means that color is coming from the genuine mineral. Where do you source amethyst from? We actually, we get it from one or two spots, but I think most of it is what we get from South America. What's interesting about that, and a very good sized portion of our PrimaTek colors actually we do source from South America. Okay, I'm gonna jump in here, and we're gonna fast forward kind of through this. There's amethyst. Yep, we get it from amethyst comes from Soledad, Brazil. So hopefully those of you that have your kit, you should have received this handout, which kind of shows you where all of our minerals come from. That. All right. Good question, Deborah. We'll talk about series number and how it affects the color chart here right now. So this is our color chart. Hopefully everyone that has a kit also has a color chart. I would highly suggest that you have a color chart available to you. You can get them a couple different ways. First way, of course, is we would love for you to visit the Plaza stores and pick up one there. Option number 2 would be to, you could go to danielsmith.com and download one. They're free. So, so this is kind of what the cover looks like. And then basically it's a 4, well, actually it's probably six panels. So, and this is kind of what it looks like on the inside. So on the main side, the big side of the color chart, it houses all of our, what we call our, or what I call our general line colors. So those are colors that are synthetic and or natural ones. But notice when I say natural, I'm not being specific to mineral-based colors. So even though colors like umber and sepia and ochres, those colors do come from the earth, but they are not mineral colors. So that's why the ochres and colors like that are not included in our PrimaTek series. Right. So here's just kind of a look through them. And then on the back side of the color chart, those of you that have one, you see that we have all of our PrimaTek colors that they're at the top. And these are all of them all in one place. And down below the PrimaTek colors are luminescent colors. So luminescent colors for us are ones that are either interference, iridescent, or what we call duochrome. So just to kind of explain the differences there between the three. This is a duochrome color. This is a question that I get quite a bit. So basically what a duochrome color does is that it bounces between 2 different colors. So on the right side of the paint out there, you see where it is black, and you can see on the other side it's white, but there's a huge difference between what the color looks like on white versus what it looks like on black. So think about for a moment, like when you go to a car show and you see a car with a really fancy paint job, and one perspective, the car looks one color, and then the other looks like something slightly different or very different. So the way that this happens is that these duochrome colors have mica in them, and the mica can be chemically altered in a way that bends light. So basically, it oxidizes the different layers of the mica, and depending upon how deep that oxidation goes, it changes the angle from which light is refracted. So so if you imagine a prism for a moment, when you put light through a prism and you change the angle just slightly, you see a different color. So same thing happens here. So depending upon how we chemically alter the mica determines what color you see. So this is duochrome saguaro green. So another question I get quite a bit is, what's the difference between iridescent and interference pigments? So iridescent pigments, it's a reflection. Think about a mirror. So it's what happens when the particle of light hits the pigment matrix and light bounces back. So it bounces back much like a mirror. So when you see an iridescent color, it's able to work with different backgrounds. So it can work on a dark background, like a black background, or it can work on a white background, just like on typical white or ivory watercolor paper. So the difference is that it has mica and things like that, and that mica is constructed in such a way where it is meant to reflect back directly at you like a mirror. Now, an interference color is very different. If you were to look at an interference color and try and brush out an interference color on white paper, you wouldn't see very much at all. But when you take an interference color and put it on a black watercolor paper or a black background, suddenly that blows up and you see all sorts of color. And what's going on there is that the mica is oxidized or chemically altered in a way that that basically scatters light into different directions. And when that happens, we're able to see metallics, we're able to see fluorescent colors, we're able to see all sorts of things, just depending upon the way that the mica is altered. It causes the light to come in, and rather than having it come in a more of a uniform type of look, it tends to want to scatter the light in all sorts of different directions. So that's why we're really able to only see it on black backgrounds and not on white ones. All right, so head on over. If those of you that have the color chart, go ahead and open it up and go all the way to the top where you find the word watercolor. And this is where we're going to get into what the specific information on the color chart contains. So there was a question earlier about series and what is series and what does series mean. So in each of those colors, you see a circle number, and that circle number denotes the series number for each of the colors. Now, the series number is kind of the baseline for the price for each of our colors. So we have series numbers that range from 1 to 5, and a series 1 color is on the lower end at MSRP, and a number 5 is the higher end. So in each of those colors, depending upon basically what our cost to make them, helps us to decide what series number or what price level they should be at. Okay. Now, when you look at the color chart and you go back up to the top there and you see the word watercolor, right to the next to the word watercolor, you see this information. So that first piece there where it says color information, that's letting you know that all of the information on the color chart flows from left to right. So so basically that's just kind of the guide in which the direction in which the information flows. So next to that, you see available in, and basically this denotes what format the color is available in. And it's either going to be available in a 15 mil tube, a 5 mil tube, a watercolor stick, or a half pan. So I get a lot of questions all the time. Well, what is a watercolor stick? Well, what a watercolor stick is it's a stick that only has the pigment and the gum arabic in it. So there's no distilled water in it. So basically what you have here is a very concentrated stick of color, okay? So, and what these are really nice for is when you travel. Those of you who've traveled with tubed watercolor know how much fun that is. I have to do it quite a bit, as I carry quite a bit of paint with me wherever I go, because I never know what somebody's going to ask for. So, but when it inevitably happens, it's funny. So every time I show somebody that, it's like, how much is actually in that bag? And I'm afraid to know, to be honest. So anyway, so when you're traveling with tubed watercolor, one of the things that isn't so fun is that when you go to open your tube of paint, you'll open it and you'll hear this pop, and then all of a sudden you've got paint all over your hands. So these watercolor sticks are really handy because you can either cut them up and put them in a half pan, or you can make it so that you can just take the whole stick with you, and you can just add color to, or add water when you get to your destination. So very easy to travel with. We make them in 51 colors, and they're extremely easy to travel with because they're not a wet product. So what's kind of fun is you could have them in your bag and take them on the airplane, and TSA thinks they're crayons. So all good. So these are just wonderful, wonderful little things to travel with, because they give you all of that, all of the potency, or the pigment ratio here is the same as it would be as taking a tube of paint. So those are watercolor sticks, and half pans are a relatively new development for us. We came out with those in 2020. So Plaza has been very good to support us with those and support our sets. So if you're interested in half pans, check out plazaart.com. And probably later on too, I'll kind of give you some practical ideas and ways in how to use those. Specifically about our half pans, we take a 3-step approach. Each half pan takes 3 to 4 pours. So the reason why we do that is that we need to kind of evacuate as much distilled water out of the paint as we can before we put them in a half pan. Okay, back to the color chart. So next to the format, we have our light fastness rating. So how do we do this? So basically, depending upon the outcome of that Xenon Phanometer, this helps us determine which category our colors kind of fall into. So if you see a Roman numeral 1, that color lasts 100 years or more. If you see a number or a Roman numeral 2, that means the color light fastness is very good and it's rated at 100 years. 3 is what we consider to be fair, which is 50 to 70. And 4 is what we would consider to be a fugitive color. So that color begins to fade anywhere between 15 and 20 years. So what does fugitive mean when we talk about fugitive? I know we talked about it fading, but what specifically can happen, say, with a color that is bright like opera pink? What do you think happens? There's a question there. What is ASTM? This is a good time to tackle that one. So ASTM is the kind of the governing body that basically creates standards for our industry, whether it be safety, whether it be light fastness. Basically, they provide the standards that our industry has for assigning things like light fastness and safety. All right, so we only have 2 colors in our entire range that are fugitive. So I mentioned one, that was opera pink, but what's the other one that you all may be surprised to know about? Everybody's thinking, I can tell.
Alizarin?
Yes, very good. Yes, alizarin crimson is a fugitive color. When that color exposed to light over enough time tends to want to turn pink. So alizarin crimson. So what's really funny about that is that every color mixing class I've ever taken, the instructor has always wanted to use alizarin crimson, you know, and then afterwards, after I found out that pretty much everybody's alizarin crimson is fugitive, it made me wonder, why are we mixing with a color that we know is fugitive? I don't know.
Scott, I've just
Yes.
decided that next time you need to have prizes for your quiz questions.
Yeah, I've gotten them. I agree.
All right. Well, no, we can do that now, actually. We can definitely do that.
So alizarin permanent is not so fugitive, correct?
It is correct. It is permanent. So basically, alizarin crimson, the original version is made from only one pigment, but the permanent version, in order to make that hue very similar to the single pigment version, requires 2 pigments. And when we do that, we bring 2 pigments that are light fast together, and it's synthesized so that it's as close we can make it to the single pigment version. All right, so next is non-staining or staining. So what this is that we give you kind of a rating for how easy colors are to lift. So a 1 is what we consider to be a non-staining color. So that means we can lift probably, you know, anywhere between 95 and 98% of the color. 2 is a low staining color, which means that you could probably pick up as much as anywhere from 60 to 80%. 3 is a medium staining color, meaning that probably you'll be able to pick up anywhere between, you know, 40 to 55%, somewhere in there. And any color that we designate as a high staining color means that when that color is down, there ain't no picking it up. So any color that you see with a 4, you should really pay close attention to because it is going to be not a color that is going to be able to lift very well. Okay. All right, granulation. So we designate which colors granulate and which ones don't. So if you see an N, that means no, that color does not granulate. If you see a Y, it does mean yes, that color granulates to varying degrees. So kind of good to know because not everybody likes to paint with colors that granulate. Transparency is a big one to really understand with color and paint in particular. So tell me this, for a Daniel Smith apron, just like the one I'm wearing, what happens when you blend a transparent color with an opaque color? Whose nature does it want to take on?
Okay.
I hear everybody think. I don't see it in the chat though.
My
That's what I'm
chat's
looking at.
disabled.
Uh-oh.
Oh,
Chat's
go ahead and
disabled?
unmute yourself to answer a prize question because it's, you know, whoever gets there first, right?
Okay.
Please.
What
Okay,
was
once you
the
take on the
question
staining
again?
one,
I'm gonna have to come up with a different question now.
Yeah.
it definitely wants to take on the staining.
All right.
Yeah,
It definitely wants to take on the opaque nature, right?
yeah.
So
Yes.
wouldn't you like to know that when before you bought that color? So I don't know how many times that I've made this
Yeah.
mistake in the beginning, that when I would go to the paint rack and I would look at the rack and I'd go,
Is that
ooh,
what I
that color
did?
sounds cool.
Need to know.
And I get it home and then I start using it and then suddenly
I'm still typing and
it's not reacting. It's not reacting like the way
Let me
that
close it.
that I
and
thought
open
it
back
would.
up.
So it's important to understand transparency so that when you are blending colors, that you're blending colors that have similar transparent qualities so that you can have a more predictable result. Okay. All right, last piece there is whenever you see a P, that denotes that color is a PrimaTek color. So remember, those are colors that are derived from minerals. So those are all of the qualities that we give you on the color chart. So let's move forward. Actually, I'm gonna fast forward through this. So let's look at this. So this is kind of a cutout of one of the colors on the color chart. So it's ultramarine blue. So we talked about that a little bit in the beginning. So what, besides the series number, what is the first piece of information that we give you? Anybody?
The color.
No, quantity?
Yeah, Cheryl's got it right. What size they come in? So ultramarine blue comes in a 15 mil tube, a 5 mil tube, a stick, and a half pound.
Oh.
Okay, and I'm Sheila, and I'll take your apron right now.
Well, I have to come up with a new question. I'm gonna have to dig deep on this. So if you're gonna earn an apron, you're gonna have to answer a really tough question.
Okay.
All right, what's the next piece of info?
Light fastness.
Yes, so what's the light fastness of this color? So a 1 means what?
100
100
years or more.
100
100
years.
years or more. Very good. All right, what's next? What's that number 3?
Staining.
Yeah, so it's a medium staining color, right?
Yeah.
And why? What does the Y mean?
Does it granulate or not?
Granulates.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, Tara, I think we're gonna have to go ahead and mute everyone. See the trouble I created? Darn it.
Yeah.
All right, so
Oops,
so this,
sorry.
here we go again. So all right, so so the Y means that yes, this color granulates, and that open circle means that this color is fully transparent. So those letters and numbers underneath, those colors actually denote the pigment. So P is always going to stand for pigment. The next letter is always going to denote the color family that it comes from. So the number or the letter B means that this is pigment blue, and the 29 means that this is the 29th shade of blue. So this is part of a kind of an international system that was devised so that paint manufacturers could kind of give you a ballpark look into where these colors kind of sit on a color wheel. So PB 29 means pigment blue 29. So what's interesting, let me ask you all this, is what if this said PR 222? So what is that going to mean? So we know that P is always going to stand for pigment. What do you think? Yeah, the second letter means that it's red. Okay, and it's the 202nd shade of red. So that's kind of what those numbers mean. All right. All right. So I think we're going to bail out right here. And whew, man, that was fast. I'm just going to paint out some color real quick and just kind of hit some of the highlights. And I promise not to keep you too much longer, but all of your questions were really good. So for an apron, before I get going, in what year was Daniel Smith founded? Tara, I need your help here.
1976.
Who heard it first? I'm going to leave this up to Tara so Tara can be the bad guy.
I heard one voice.
Truth.
Well, I thought you muted us, so I put it in the chat. 1988.
Oh, okay.
I typed it first.
So are we taking chat or
I think we need to. I think we need to take. I think we need to
Yes.
take it in the chat because otherwise everybody's going to shout over.
all right, Susan is the winner then. Oh wait, no, wait, 1976. Sorry. Goodness, so many answers. All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Carmen.
I'm switching over.
Carmen
okay.
got it.
All right, congratulations, Carmen. All right, so I'm just going to brush out a few colors that I think that I really love. So the first one I'm going to show you is the Daniel Smith Mayan Blue Genuine. And this was the color that I kind of fell in love with. This was the color that my friend gave me all of those years ago. And what this color really does is something I think pretty special. It is just kind of a luscious granulating blue. A little bit more there.
Control and
So this
scroll.
is Mayan blue.
Scrolling on the mouse. So I just
So
did
I
two
did it by
fingers.
accident.
You must have held the control and scrolled it.
All right, so
I think everybody
next-
isn't muted. Tara, that might have been you.
Sorry, I'm having problems with the chat, so I'm catching up on questions. Apologies.
This is a great time to ask questions when I'm going through this.
Okay,
right.
so can you let me, if get through the ones I gotta catch up on. That's okay. Can you sorry, remind everyone, or someone asked for a refresher on what the PrimaTek means?
It's short for primitive technology. All right, so this is green apatite. So this is probably my go-to green for foliage. It's really, really intense, but you can also take it and you can add some additional water to it, and you can get all sorts of beautiful different different hues from being very, very intense all the way down to something that could be almost be used more as a spring color. So one of the things that I really love to do with green apatite is take Quinacridone Gold, which is kind of my secret sauce. I love taking and using Quinacridone Gold for almost everything. So I'll take a little bit of Quin Gold and bring it over here and grab a little bit of water and pick a little bit up. And then I'll put it in here and then hit it with a little bit more water. And what you end up getting is really just this beautiful play on color. So wonderful for doing fall foliage and things like that. Really can create some really interesting and beautiful blends. And what's kind of cool is that as this sets up, you'll start to see the green apatite kind of finger through the Quinacridone Gold. So it creates some really cool and interesting combinations. So that's Quinacridone Gold and green apatite. Let's see. Let's look at.
Scott,
Yes.
I've heard a lot about like honey-based watercolors like M-Gram as well, and I wondered what are the advantages and disadvantages of that, and why doesn't Daniel Smith use it?
Well, it kind of comes down to what characteristics the manufacturer would like to impart. The big difference between gum arabic and honey, for example, is the re-wetting abilities. Some people like the re-wetting ability of honey over gum arabic. The disadvantages in my mind to honey is the feel. It kind of has a gummy feel, even though I know gum arabic says gum, but the feel is different with honey than it is with gum arabic. But in terms of, is one make it more light fast than the other? No, honey has been found to be a very reliable and stable binder for paint. All right, here's a giveaway question. We'll do another, and this is only in the chat, please. Where does gum arabic come from? What is it? Claudette, you're the winner. It comes from a tree. It actually comes from the acacia tree, which most of the world's gum arabic is actually comes from Southeast Asia. So pretty much that whole realm there. But the biggest producer of it is actually India. So make sure you DM or direct message Tara your address so that I can get that on the way to you. Okay, so this is going to be Lapis Lazuli. So lapis is a very interesting color. It comes out of the tube looking very, very dark, but when you brush it out, you find that it's more of a delicate sky blue color. And we'll do one more and then we'll close it out with questions. I'm gonna do a non-PrimaTek color. And let's do Moonglow. So this is Moonglow. Moonglow is an interesting color because it's actually an oops color. We didn't intend to make it. So our chemist had a long weekend. He's never really owned up what from. but he was making a batch of paint, and it turned out to be very different than what he thought it was going to be. And he showed John Cogley, the current owner, Daniel Smith, and he said, look at this, look at this. And he produced this color Moonglow. So what's really interesting about Moonglow is that it's made from actually 3 different pigments. And what's kind of cool is that when this decides to set up and dry, that you'll start to see more of this red kind of pop from the paint, and actually see some of the red kind of move towards the edges. It creates a really interesting effect, especially for like doing things like shadows and things like that. Okay, so let's close it out with some questions, and I'll let everybody kind of get on their way. I think we could probably do this for a couple more hours, but I'm sure you all have better things to do.
We definitely could. Is there one hue that sells more than others?
This sounds like another trivia question.
How many aprons do you want to give away, Scott?
Okay. All right. So for another apron, take a guess which one it is. Nope, not Moonglow. Fancy Yellow? Nope. Opera Rose? Nope. Ultramarine Blue? That's a good guess, but no cigar.
Oh, someone said Quin Gold Deep, but they DM'd it to me.
Oh, I did.
Nope. Very, very close, but nope. Not French, not white.
We're
No.
all gonna be like slapping our heads when we hear the answer, aren't we?
Well, I referenced it. I referenced it earlier. I called it
Someone said-
secret sauce.
Quinacridones Gold.
All right, I have another
Yes,
DM.
there we go.
It was
Who
me,
was that?
Carol Starr.
All right, you didn't win before, did you?
Nope. But I
All right.
had some
All
answers.
right. Very good. Well, let's if there aren't any more questions, I'll hang around here just for a second or two and be available. But I just wanted to take a second and thank you all for joining me today. I really appreciate it. We here at Daniel Smith really appreciate your support. Thank you so much for supporting us and making what we do possible.
Hi, this is
There's
Debbie.
one last
I
question.
asked a question, yeah, in the chat. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, sure thing. Okay. Is there any kind of chart that has recommended color combinations like the green apatite and Quin Gold?
Well, if you go to if you like the Daniel Smith Facebook page, we have a really cool segment that we do every Monday, and it's called Monday Mixes. And all of our brand ambassadors will go ahead and submit. Will submit their Monday mixes. Lately, we've been using a brand ambassador by the name of Allison Pinto, and every Monday she submits a new Monday mix, which is really kind of a fun thing.
And I will say that Allison is brilliant, and she will be doing a more interactive Daniel Smith event in June. So look out for that email. And then I did want to mention that this morning we sent out an email for our next event, which is painting loose watercolor flowers with Dale Rowney. So if you did not see that event email come out and you're interested, please go back and check that out. And we have a lot of thank you, Scott. So, you know, and I would like to thank you as well. Always a pleasure, of course. And trying to think of anything else.
All right.
Scott.
Well, if any of you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to your Plaza team member, and I can be reached through email.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. This is a highlight of my, week when we get to do them, and I love seeing familiar faces and going. The construction workers are cutting me off. So it's a pleasure. Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you next time. Take care, everyone.
All right, take care. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Thank you.